Right, we'll call this design review board meeting to order, 4:04 on October 8th. Hopefully we have a good kind of productive meeting today of more sort of procedures and our own internal organization.
And before we get too far, I'm going to go ahead and read the rules of decorum if I can share my screen. Please. Okay. Can everyone see this PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So the city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board and commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and about the community engagement processes, you can visit our website. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to identify themselves using the name that they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. And if you need me to change your name in the Zoom meeting, just let me know in the Q&A box, and I'm happy to do that for you. So this is a Zoom webinar format. So if anyone wants to have public participation during the appropriate time, go ahead and you can click the raise hand button. I don't think anyone's joining on the phone today. So I will skip that part. You can also find it in the reactions button. And I think that's it. Okay. And then I will hand it back over to Brendan.
Okay. Maybe we can pull up the agenda, or do you have that available, or or do you need me to do that?
I was going to put it in the chat, but I can share my screen if that is easier. Let me just make this a little bit larger.
Yeah, there's the agenda notes, and then there's just getting through like the meeting minutes approval and all that, right?
No.
Right.
The agenda notes, or you were talking about the regular agenda, Brendan?
I think today's agenda has
Those.
the agenda notes
Oh.
approval on it.
Okay. Let me see if this is the one you're looking at. Let me share. Is this what you wanted to see here? Can you see the DAB meeting notes, the discussion?
Yes.
Okay. Is that what you wanted?
We also have like the DAB packet, I guess.
Yeah, that's what it is. Like just the general agenda.
I can share that if that's.
Yeah, I will need another screen to do that. We don't have the capability to show those.
I can do that.
And I'm pulling it up too. It's just being very slow.
I got it here. How's that? You're seeing all this?
Yeah, and so if anybody's wondering where all the screens are on the top of the ribbon, there's several tabs, so you can go back and forth between the different ones, between the regular agenda and the agenda notes.
So approval of meeting minutes is next.
Yes. And we're gonna dig into this a little bit later, but does anybody have any comments, or can we approve the meeting minutes from September's meeting?
I'm generally ready to make a motion to approve. I think that I was just. Towards the end, we were pretty stern, or I guess direct, as far as the building needing to sort of calm down in its use of materiality, the number of moves in the building, and then also not just having the existing building be in the shadow, that it needs to be a part of the celebration of this paseo and all that. Does that come through enough? Like implement more refinement and restraint in the use of the proposed building materials, increase consistency of the design and materials on all four elevations with more wrapping and integration between all four sides, improve design integration and cohesion between the pre-existing building and the new building. Yeah, I mean, all of the talking points are there. Just doesn't quite capture the drama that we left.
Well, I would ask to, Amelia, these are directly from that section, right? Verbatim
As best
From
as
the-
possible, yeah.
from that.
Yeah.
So,
And then there was some, it includes my revisions. So,
I think it's good. I'll make a motion to approve.
anybody want to second that? Can I second that?
Yes, you can.
Okay, yes, I second that
All-
motion.
All in favor? And I think you and I were the only ones there. Or were you
Yes.
there, Harry?
I wasn't there, so I don't know if I'm allowed
Well,
to.
that's true.
And I had
Yeah.
recused
It's-
myself, so I don't know. if I
Stephen had
can-
recused himself. Yes, so
Yeah, so I,
I,
all right. Here's the rest of your agenda here.
and then we wanted to remove the calendar checkup.
We do, there's no public participation today, is that right?
Well, let's see, we have a few folks tuned in today. This would be a chance if you have anything that you want to comment on. We're not reviewing any projects today, but anything that's not on the agenda that you would like to comment on, just raise your hand. Okay. Not seeing any hands at this time. So I think we can move on.
right, so I think we can just move to board matters. Which if you go to the tab at the top of your screen that Kalani has pulled up. So we had our DAB appreciation coffee, which was really lovely. Thank you for that. A couple of weeks ago, and we discussed needing the opportunity to come together as a board and streamline our procedures and kind of our role as DAB members, and then also our deliverables. And so, we've come up with a few items that we feel like we need to discuss, but hoping that it will be an open conversation and sort of thoughts on basically how Rory and I and Kalani and Amelia have thought that this is how we want to structure our meetings going forward. So, and it is based partly on how we ran the meeting for September. Then when there were only 3 of us there, I think it was a good time to test some of this out, because it has been difficult for us to fall within the time guidelines, and so we just wanted to see if we can streamline this as much as we can, and still have all of the board members' voices heard for the design review. So, we broke.
Lumi has her hand up right now, Brandon.
Oh,
I just
Oh,
wanted to check on the moving the calendar checkup if we're gonna check on
I
the
have a hard stop at 5:30 for some kids stuff. So if we could do the calendar check that way, if we run late, we're not struggling to find our next date.
oh,
Do you
yes.
mind?
Nope. Thank you for reminding me.
so I just need to confirm that everybody's available for the November and December meetings. We have the letter to council if the board would like to participate in that. That's a kind of a group activity during one of the meetings in November, and then in December, you guys will read the draft version and approve it and send it off to council. It's due, I believe, December 19th, 18th or 19th. So just checking on making sure that everyone's available for that we have a quorum and
When is that? That would be November 12th.
let me see. Second Wednesday, yeah, November 12th, same time as normal. And then December 10th.
mhm.
November 12th, unfortunately, is the AIA Western Regional Conference, and so I will not be attending DAB. I will not be available to attend DAB that day.
You will be available for the December meeting, though, to finalize the draft of the letter if the board.
December 10th, yes. Yep.
Yes. Okay.
And Kalani, maybe you can explain a little bit about the process of,
Yeah.
seems a little different this year of how we're writing this letter.
So city council sent a prompt. I'll send it in an email. You'll see it come through an email. And it's asking the board if they would like to participate in sending a letter to council on their recommendations. Part of that will influence the work plan. Part of it requires a bit of homework. So going over what the city strategic plan is, and then the department work plan, which we will attach some information there so you can look at that. But they're asking specifically for information and the board's input related to those things. And so there's not further kind of detailed prompts, but that's an opportunity for the board to sit down in November. And what typically has happened before is the board gets together during their meeting, and they usually elect a person that is the scribe, and you go over what the rough draft of the letter is, and then the scribe then crafts the letter to the next meeting. And then at that next meeting, you guys can look at the letter and approve it or make some fine tune the letter at that point. And then it'll be in time for us to send the memo off to city council for their January, early spring, like Q1 retreat. They do work planning retreat items at that time. So that is the kind of order of how that usually happens. And they're moving it to a 2-year cycle. So when they do work planning, so it's not every year. Now it's every kind of work planning cycle.
So hopefully they, I mean, it seems, my understanding is that the city council reads them individually, but because they can't discuss them unless they're in a meeting, they're generally not discussed. And so I'm not even sure how widely read they are. So maybe with this work planning session, maybe they can be acknowledged a little bit better.
And that's in the cover letter, you'll see that that's the intention, is to pull this into their work planning. They have a retreat where they plan the 2-year work plan, and to pull in the input from the boards and commissions at that time and hopefully influence some of the work plan items.
Great.
I can make the November one. I'll be in New Zealand, but I can call in from there. And then, but I can't make the December one. I'm at a conference that day, but I can, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's just the calendar check. We wanted to make sure that we kind of let folks know. And then when you see the email coming in, that you know what's going to be on the, what that is in that process. So that's it.
Okay.
Great.
Great. So now should we move on to the procedures? I keep jumping the gun. I don't want to.
It's okay, we're good.
Okay.
We're done with the kind of housekeeping items.
Okay, great. So, I guess we can kind of, the three items that we want to discuss are procedures of DABs, and then breaking that, and then basically the pre-planning of the meetings, the prioritization of the order of the criteria, which should be happening on the Tuesday pre-meeting before the DAB Wednesday meetings, and then what is the deliverable, which should be happening post meeting and is more critical for our meeting minutes, which are used to convey our big topic items and our suggestions that can be implemented through planning board and through planning staff. So going back to procedures of DAB, we would like to start our meetings with sort of a general introduction of what DAB is. I think that a lot of our applicants don't necessarily know or have a full understanding of what our role is. And then at the same time, giving them an understanding of what their role, what our expectations of their role is in that meeting. And when I first started, when Lauren was the chair, she did a brief, had everybody introduce themselves and at the same time give sort of one nugget of positive feedback for the project, just to kind of start the meeting off on a positive note, and sort of starting this atmosphere of conversation. So that's something that we could throw into this list of item H, whatever. I want our meetings to be somewhat regimented in the sense that we are getting to all of our discussion items and not running over time. But at the same time, I don't want it to be so regimented that we're not having open and good conversations about these design elements and discussions, because I think a lot of solutions that we have to the items that are partially met or not met through the criteria can be solved and approached in several different ways. And so I want that conversation to be open and but at the same time, it's been a little frustrating having the applicant kind of interjecting pretty consistently and it just sort of feels like we're losing control of the time that we have allotted for these projects. So we thought we would start the meeting with again introduction of what DAB is, the procedure and the format being that we will be we'll ask the applicant to present, the staff presents, then the applicant presents. We will get public feedback, and then we'll be addressing these items on the criteria, and we'll be starting, and this will be the roll call for how we'll be addressing our comments, the order of who will be speaking, and that will be consistent for the entire meeting, maybe not every meeting. We sort of threw Matthew to the wolves last time.
We did, and he's not here to defend himself. I think so.
Um,
Sort of a quick sort of check-in here, though. Or Kalani, is your hand still up, or is it up again?
It's up again. I just wanted to double check and make sure everybody knew what a roll call kind of input is, if there's familiarity from the board members.
We're gonna break this open a little bit.
Yeah.
I think real quick though, just so like everyone's benefit. I mean, the managing the meeting is to what objective? And that's sort of what I just want to understand that conceptually before we start discussing strategies. And my understanding is that the tone and the amount of resources required to operate a DAB board, that we're sort of, it's a shifting amount of resources and time, and that's why we're trying to manage it, right? 8 years ago, I remember if we had a big project come in, we mentioned that it may take 2 different review sessions, and we just like planned for it. Or staff or Kalani would come to us and say, "Hey, you guys will bring pizza in. Are you guys down to stay for 4 to 6 hours? Like this may be a marathon." And we would sometimes say like, "Yeah," and sometimes we'd vote to say, "No, no, we're breaking this up over 2. This is crazy. Like there's no way we can do that."
We
So then
actually can't do 2 meetings, though, from legal, from our city
Mhm.
attorney's office. So it needs to be done in a single visit. So that's one thing that's not a possibility.
Is that an anymore thing? Because it used to
It's
be a
no,
or
they had to be re-referred. So it was
there's no continuation of DAB.
there's
You
no
can't.
continuation. The way that DAB is set up, it should be a one visit and done within that time frame. So that's why our scheduling is, we schedule projects as they come in. If there's too many for one night, we need to break that off. The ones that come back around are the ones that have been re-referred after the approval based on some conditions. So I don't want the board to think that the continuation is a possibility when it's not a possibility.
Okay, so I just want to make that clear for everybody, right? So one, and then if there's more than one project that we're trying to fit them both in, and again, is there flexibility there where we can say, hey, reviewing this, the week, like how quickly you get us the deficiency list or whatever, and can we raise our hand via email and say, hey, there's no way we're going to get to 2 of these projects given how many criteria need to be reviewed on each one or one of them?
I think that really has to do, we would have to have a larger discussion with the planning director because there is expectations from the applicant to,
Be
pushing
on
them
that
out
board.
and
Yeah.
extend them into the process longer. So,
So I think it's just for the board to hear is right, like all of this effort we're about to crack open is in an attempt to manage time to get through these things efficiently.
Yeah.
So like the lens associated with it.
and
And then
we've
I
heard
guess
quite a
we
bit
asked-
from the business community about the length of time that applications take and getting through the process. So having a timely, efficient review is important there too,
Yep.
for applicants.
Understood. So just to be clear, staff, you or Kalani, you're basically preparing us and training us like young Jedi here, to potentially see 2 projects max in a meeting. And therefore we need each project with all the accoutrement of introduction, meeting minutes, public participation, et cetera, to essentially be under an hour.
I would say that all the, front load of the meeting, the meeting minutes, the housekeeping at the end of the meeting, don't count that as part of your
Right.
review. Count as part of your review that single project for an hour. So right now we're slated for 2 hours. There has been an increase in applications being referred, and so we're not quite sure what the timing is, but the expectation from applicants is it could be that they all want to go at the same month. And so getting the board
Right.
into a rigor that is, they're able to see at least 2. And if it's more than that in one night, we would ask you guys if you're available to go beyond the 6:30 cutoff time. So that is what we're preparing for, seeing the increase in.
So I think part of the challenge that I see there is 2 projects and I think Stephen, you helped us really understand this, like a walkthrough awning project versus a big
Right.
project with a bunch of deficient criteria. We're never going to put an hour onto each of those, right? There's going to be potentially
Right.
a project that has a ton of deficient items. It's going to spur a ton of discussion that may be more than an hour versus one that may have a checkbox, just it's required to go to DAB because of a budget or whatever, and then we're going to walk it through. I guess
Sure.
before we get into how to manage, because this detailed agenda is going to be strategies and discussion about how to manage time. How do we allocate time? Like, what process do we have when we receive it? Receive the packet or start to understand. Like, at what point can we raise our hand and say, "Hey, Brennan and I have the meeting the day before, where we go and we meet with Kailani and Amelia and we discuss how much time we imagine our board will spend on any given topic. So that's really, I guess, our one chance. And we never have any input from DAB members because I don't know if anyone's done their homework ahead of time or we just haven't prompted anybody that, hey, ahead of our pre-agenda meeting, we should be getting feedback on if people think the time allocation is adequate or not. Is
Right, and
that
that's when I first started, we were getting our DAB packets on Monday and we're and then meeting again on Wednesday, and that has since changed, and we are getting the DAB packets significantly earlier. And the objective there is that we have criteria that it's well outlined in our packet, and that the DAB members should be reviewing the packet as early as possible. And if they are going through the criteria and they say, uh, that, yeah, I think that, that this seems fine, and I think that we can, review this in the allotted time for our meetings, or raise your hand on like Monday afternoon at the latest and say, this is a big sore spot for me, and I'm noticing in the project that the materials are ugly and do not match the neighborhood, or they don't meet human scale, or whatever you feel like you can attach that to a design criteria, that you bring that to Kalani or Amelia, or my attention early, maybe Monday afternoon, it would be the deadline, to say, I think that we also need to address XYZ. And then we can incorporate that into our pre-planning meeting on Tuesday. And that's why the packets have been coming to us earlier. So I think it's really important that DAB understands it, unless they have significant input, that we really need to be sticking to the prioritization of, what comes out of those Tuesday planning meetings. And then also we get those Tuesday planning meeting agenda updates.
Well, that's what I want to ask you, Brendan. Like, it almost feels like we're putting a lot of onus on people to sort of self-initiate unprompted. I guess they're prompted with the packet and then need to like feedback to us. And then we have that meeting and then we give them like 12 hours notice before the actual DAB review with all of our prioritization. And then if you guys notice, we're scheduling time, which you may or may not agree with, how much time we're allocating to each deficient item. I guess, is there a version where we actually have our meeting earlier and the agenda meeting so that we identify, at least Brendan, you and I at least have a chance to outline how many minutes we're going to spend on everything. And that goes out much earlier, 3 days before. And that's really when Stephen and Harriet and Matt can say, hey, wait, I'm going to take issue with this awning in a way that you can't allocate 10 minutes as a walkthrough. Like, I want to talk about this. Is that even appropriate, Kailani, to like have, because we're starting to like have a discussion at that point.
That's what I wanted to talk about is any of your input to the chair or the vice chair on the agenda and the scheduling of the review needs to be done individually, privately through email, so you're not replying all, because then it's triggering a meeting essentially. And so if you do have something that you want to add to the review there, like that you felt like the criteria wasn't addressed, that could be done through email to you, Rory, or to you, Brendan. There's also, we can always host the meeting if you want to have the agenda meeting Friday or Monday instead of Tuesday. It's just getting that input and just making sure that you're not having a discussion about the merits of the project. You're actually just trying to make sure you get something on the agenda as far as a relevant topic area that you think might have been missed in the staff packet. And then that'll go into the kind of scheduling, the time scheduling. But we can try to move that meeting around if it's not.
Yeah, I wonder, I don't want to sort of create a whole nother topic of discussion. I just wonder, Brendan, maybe we do jump into these and then we can hold that, in the back of our minds, that if that would be useful given how we want to start running meetings more sort of organized, that's available to us to move that agenda meeting, pre-agenda meeting.
Yeah, so I mean, if we're sort of continuing down the path of that of number two, we've been making an effort to triage if we have multiple projects in one night to kind of triage the projects that are, you know, going to be a quicker review. Maybe they only have one or two criteria items to be discussed. Or like the parking garage on 11th and Spruce or whatever. That, you know, we have an understanding of that this is going to be, we'll do this one first and it with the intention of it being a quicker review. And then we can still have allocated so that the quick review team doesn't have to stay through the entire meeting. I think would be fair to them to get that out of the way. And then once we get into a meatier meat, a review with more meat on it, that we start prioritizing and shifting like the design criteria, not necessarily in the order that they're presented in the packet, but in the order that we think is going to take more time. And a lot of the time we get to certain criteria items and we've kind of, you know, we've discussed it and we can just, it becomes a lot faster. Like they kind of build and feed off of each other as they go.
Can I say something, Brennan?
Of course.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, what I see is like, because we have, let's say there's 5 or 6 criteria, right, that we're going over. I think we all feel, I know I do, I feel like, oh, we go through each one and I have to comment. But really it's almost like staff goes through, here's the 5 things. Here's what it means. Here's why we don't think they've met it or we need some help with it. And then we look at them all together, like all 5 things, because there might be a few that are sort of like not as big a deal for me. And I might just focus on when I get to my turn, like talking about, oh, I'm going to talk about X, Y, and Z, but I don't care about those other things. But then we all have a consensus sort of at the end. And I'm just saying maybe we group it all together.
Oh, you're saying like instead of each person round robining per
On
topic,
each thing, yes.
each person is project wide, gives like an entire.
Yes, because
piece. That's
because
interesting.
because I feel like we feel obligated to talk on each thing, and that's where I don't know that we need to, and maybe it's just a board culture.
No, that's fascinating, dude. That's fascinating. Concept. I think two thoughts on that. One, the summary gets a little more challenging, right? Because like we're
Right.
potentially having a discourse on a topic, and then we can actually write a summary on that topic before moving on to the next topic, potentially. But then that doesn't necessarily mean we can't affect a previous summary by the time we get through 3 more freaking topics.
Right.
The other piece, though, that I think planning board Mark mentioned to me, is that they've gotten really good at training themselves to not reiterate what other people said. Even if you have the
Right.
same opinion, that they just say, hey, Steven's comments about the exterior facade and the entry location, I completely echo and agree with. Moving on.
Right. Yeah, I think that's good too. And
Or I don't have anything further to say on topic
right.
2, 3. You know what I mean? Like that's another version of self-editing, I think.
The hard thing with I find is that a lot of the stuff is so overlapping, right? Like one criteria comes up sort of as part of another. So it's not like that linear always, you know? So that's where I start to think like, well, we group them together.
So how do you feel though? Because Brendan and I, we do group topics together. So like if they're like
Right.
on the last presentation,
I'll show
we
an
took
example
3.
of
Yeah, we took
the grouping.
yeah.
that you
So
guys
we
did.
try to do that, Stephen, in a way that
that would be
one, to
good.
your point, that they're all related from a conversational and design
Yeah.
perspective, and 2, that a summary will capture, all of them. So we are trying to do that.
Yeah, it was
That
It
like
may
would
not be the whole
site.
project.
It was like site and then design and
Yeah.
material and
I mean, I trust
Same.
you guys to figure out the grouping, or again, if it's like we have comments, if we figure out like a deadline to get back to you guys on, well, we think this is going to take a long time or not. We could also say, hey, can we talk about the facade with the, the materials because they're related or something.
Yes.
I
I
think
mean, like,
that
so
would
this
be
is a
great.
great one. This one makes sense, right? Like that we took the site design criteria for landscaping and screening and the building and siting design criteria because those were in some ways completely related.
Right. Yeah.
And we gave that 20 minutes.
And
I
we
think-
gave all of those one summary, and
right.
it worked
Right.
really well.
Yep. And
So
then
you're doing, like,
building
roll call for each of these things.
no. So yeah, you would roll call for each minute allocation. So like that 20 minutes has two, building design and building materials below it. So that would be, in theory, if we go the roll call, you would talk about that chunk,
Right.
that group.
Right. So then you have, and did you guys do it like, I mean, there were only 3 of you, but like everybody goes through and then it's like, if Rory, if you said something like, oh yeah, but then you get like, does anyone have anything else to add or something at the end? Is there sort of
It's a
like,
great question because that's always been the fear with the roll call is that
Yeah.
if you go first, then after 4 other people go after you, you may want to change your mind because that's the beauty of when we have a discussion
Right.
is that we're having a dialogue and that everyone's sort of coming to it with an open mind. So here you are, like we made Matt go first on all of them. But it's just like if you say something with and you have a lot of conviction in something you say, and then by the time Stephen, you convince me otherwise. So like,
Right.
do I get an opportunity to say, hey, I actually changed my mind. Thank you. Like, how do we reconcile that?
I think you should have something at the end that's like, because something could come up for sure. Like, and it's not like you roll call everybody again, but you say, is anything,
And
Yeah.
and I think there's some opportunity for that when we do the summary. And I think we did that a lot more with Todd last year. Like there was some language that we were using that didn't make as much sense to a landscape architect.
Right.
It was pretty specific to architecture.
Sure.
So when he's trying to summarize, I think there was opportunity for us to kind of remind or emphasize points that we had made, or if you made a point and you're like, yeah, we don't need to include that in the summary, I totally changed my mind, or like I think that
Yeah.
there's some opportunity and I really look to you guys to help with the summary. I find myself often needing some wordsmithing and also just some thought organization. So I think it would be helpful to have.
That would be good to have a wrap up. Can I ask another question? If you scroll up on what you guys laid out for that last meeting, because one of the things I see, and I got to see Bob actually, like in my office preparing for the meeting, right? Which is good. And I'm thinking to myself, Jesus, like it shouldn't be this hard. Like, how much time did he have to present?
He's supposed to have 10 minutes,
10
and
minutes.
he took closer to 20
Oh, really?
because
Okay.
the developer
Cut him
also
off.
wanted to talk.
Yeah, the owner. Mhm.
So
Well,
that,
because I really think that I think they should have, like, I really don't want to hear about how great the project is for the community and stuff. Like, this isn't really the place for that. Honestly, like, let's just get down to business. Like, here's the 5 criteria, here's how you've achieved it. And, we don't need all that. Like, really, I just want to see plan, section, elevation, and they have the 3D model available. So if we can say, hey, can you cruise around, like the one that was over by
Totally.
sea, like, can you go to the
100%. I think
And-
keeping them at 10 minutes is something that we are absolutely, and that's part of Brendan's approach here, where like at the beginning of every meeting, she's actually going to just quickly outline Dab's role, the applicant's role in this meeting, and the fact that we're not a quasi-judicial board, so that everyone like is not trying to argue us into some corner to make a decision in favor of their project or whatever, because
Right.
what we say is advisory in nature anyways.
Right.
Right.
can I
Right, it's
ask
not-
about the presentation too? Because you can make it 10 minutes, you can make it 5 minutes. it's
We
really
used to tell them that they needed to come with a party diagram and a statement and a concept statement. That was
Yeah.
one era of a board that we used to
So-
ask for.
that would be one thing I would ask too, because I've heard several times from the board now that you get more of the development pitch rather than the design intent
Right.
in this board, and that if that's something that you'd like them to focus on, we can communicate that back to the applicant to really focus their presentation more on, the design concept,
I
you
don't
know,
even think the concept. I really think it's
and
the
nuts and
5
bolts of it.
criteria that they're deficient in or whatever it is. Like that,
Okay, yeah,
I mean, personally,
yeah.
because that's what we're talking about. Like,
I mean, that is an interesting approach, is that, but I think where they would like go through each of the criteria before we do and essentially defend or acknowledge where they're lacking.
yeah,
That is in the
exactly.
packet though, too. So they
Right.
actually make that
It's right in that
justification.
table. They have their explanation. So they preamble that. So I think it'd be redundant, and really that could take a long time. Like if you think about it, if there's 10 deficient criteria, that could take a long
Right.
time for them to like walk around the model and explain what they've done and all that. I think we're supposed to come having read through that, having looked at their drawings, and I think to your point, Stephen, we don't need much of a presentation at all. In theory, we're very familiar with the project.
Right.
I think
And I know that the staff staff has given them about like a 3-minute deadline to really give a synopsis, a project description, location, project, facts prior to the applicant presenting. So there's that basic intro that comes at the very beginning of this too. So
Right.
And I think it's important for the applicant to recognize that this is not the chance for them to defend back to the planning board or planning staff, that this is a different review and that their presentation really needs to orient us on the site plan, the floor plan, and the general elevations and material choices
Right.
and massing. That we're not here to listen to them arguing why they wanted to keep that parapet, whatever, like because planning board won't let them now. That it's not relevant to us. Like we really need
Right.
them to come at this through a different lens. I think there was one project that we reviewed on Arapahoe last year that the architect didn't show up. It was like the developer's rep or something like that. And it just sort of wasn't even a great discussion because the architect wasn't there. We couldn't really have a good discussion about design, and I'm not sure any of our comments were.
well,
Yeah,
I will say
I'm in
too
favor.
that the applicants often contact me wondering what's expected of them for their presentation. And so if I can relay to them that the board wants to speak to the design professional, that person needs to be on staff there. The presentation really needs to be a primary presentation just from that person. That I don't know if you want to, because sometimes we have some of the presentations are the owner, the design team, the landscape team, and sometimes engineering. If there's flood issues that,
Right.
sometimes those folks are in the team there to speak. So it's really up to you to craft how you want that primary introduction presentation. And it can be limited. Those other folks are welcome to be at the meeting for questions. But if I can relay that to the applicant, I think that would help a lot for them to frame their conversation for you and make it maybe less intrusive as you're trying to do your design review.
What do
Yeah,
you guys
I'm
think
trying to
about that? I like that.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say I like the idea of saying we really want to hear from the design professional. I
Yeah.
feel like the owner it can be in attendance and listen in, but oftentimes it's like arguing why we don't want to spend money or on.
Yeah, it just doesn't
Whatever.
make sense economically, which is not in any of the review criteria. I think where we're heading, just so if I'm understanding this correctly, is brevity in the project presentation. And honestly, I would appreciate having more time to ask questions to them, because here they are, they use all 10 minutes to present. And then if you got 2 or 3 questions, now we're at 15 to 20 minutes of their presentation.
Do you
Yeah, maybe
think
it's
that
5 minutes and 5 minutes.
That's
I
what was-
agree. I think it
5
should, yeah.
minutes?
I
Like,
I was wondering if the fact that we call it a presentation could be better worded and just say project introduction, because then
I
it's like
love that.
normal.
Yeah.
They just come in, they bring
Yeah.
up the model, they orient us around, fly it around, and then we get a chance to like just see basically from the model. That's usually what we end up needing the most. And then we can kind of take it from there. And also maybe just letting them know that's not the last opportunity they have to provide additional information. They don't have to squeeze it all into that like intro. They get to discuss things further. So maybe it's more like, hey, intro the project to us again. We can ask some questions and then let's start diving into the issues again. And you can talk to that as we move through them.
Well, let's be very careful with that, Harry, because I think that's part of what we're trying to nip in the bud too, is we are finding that applicants, like our last meeting, it was a great example. We were just asking if they could point us down a different area of the model, and then they used it as an opportunity to start talking about like presenting what they did in that area. And we were like, well, wait a second, no, we don't need a presentation on the area, we just want to see it. So can you please just park the camera in front of that facade? I don't need to hear your spiel on that facade because we're in the middle of having a conversation about whether or not we think it meets the glazing requirement. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, Roy kind of nipped that right in the bud. It was.
I think that's generally, I think what we're beating around here that feels really relevant is that like we have an entire packet. We have all of the review criteria already outlined to us that say where they're deficient or partially deficient. We have the defense or revisions made from the applicant already in our packet. If so, we're so well oriented to these projects that, to Harriet's point, if they come in, show us how good the model is and how we can, we get a quick glimpse at like what sort of tool are we working with tonight, and they orient us north south, here you are relative to what you looked at in the packet, and then they're done, and we get to ask a few clarifying questions if things were unclear between the packet. I think that'll cut those 20-minute applicant introductions down to 10. That would be my
And I
sense.
don't think it's bad for us to say, hey, you have 1 more minute.
No, it's
Yeah, totally.
I think that's fine. Now, one thing I had, I'm just thinking back to projects like, what comes to mind is the one that was sort of controversial with the St. Julian edition, right?
yeah.
Right.
And that one, had some public, and it wasn't so much us, but they got into like defending the project, right?
Well, I think the issue there, Todd defended them, and we were all,
Yeah.
as the design professionals, like, dude, that's not how this works. They all signed affidavits when they bought the properties.
Well, and it turned out one of the quote unquote public was actually Tebow's ex-wife or wife, who lived in the penthouse, which is kind of not so great. But yeah, I mean, it just seemed like on that one we spent too much time, getting into like, the politics of it.
Well, I can provide some so there's generally speaking on the both the public participation at the beginning of the meeting that's not tied to a particular project, but also the public comment in relationship to the actual item at hand. It's a 3 minute per person, but if you have a long list too of folks and you can as a group vote to bring that time down to, I think, 2 minutes a person.
Yeah, that would be good.
That's an option, and we can ask the city attorney to come back in and help if that's something you guys want to have a skill set around, just in case there's anticipated a lot of public comment. People can also bundle time. That's a way for folks you can ask if anybody wants to bundle their time, and so they get multiple people under a shorter time or a longer time period, but it ends up being shorter. So that's one way to do that too.
Yeah, Stephen, that was exactly that item G, 1G is from exactly that meeting of how much time should we be allocating any time to public comment? I mean, sometimes I think that like in last month's review, there was some public comment that was pertinent and I thought needed to be acknowledged. But then there's
Right.
sometimes, and I have asked Kalani if she would help us during the meeting to say, you know, like directly to say that that public comment is a legal issue and that has been resolved,
Right.
you know, already, and we don't even need to address it or commented on it, kind of reining in the DAB members
Yeah.
to not allocate any time to it because it's not in our
Purview.
purview.
So
Well, and
there's
one of the things
like
that came up
helpful.
on, oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say a couple of things that are helpful is knowing, and we can also do more training on this, is what are the topics that you might hear in public comment that are planning board related rather than DAB related? So issues of use,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
don't want a 3-story building next to
yeah,
my
height
house. Like, oh, sorry.
modifications, affordable housing, all of the kind of particulars around that, those things are planning board related. So we can definitely work with the DAB members so you feel like that there's a relative familiarity with those topics. So when someone does come up, because I don't think that the public knows that you don't do that either. I think that they see a board meeting, and when they come, they're not sure if this board is voting on the project. And so sometimes it's just helpful to reiterate that the board, what the purpose of DAB is, and it's really looking at very specific design related criteria. You do not approve a project, that the approval goes through planning board and city council, and that folks in the room, that tends to let folks know what you'll be looking at. So maybe that they might tailor their comments to the.
Yeah, Brendan, I think your strategy of sort of using what may feel redundant to us because we're going to hear it every meeting,
Yeah.
but for the benefit of the public and the applicant, that you give the sort of DAB spiel and have it like your little elevator pitch as far as what we do, that could help nip a bunch of that too.
Hmm. Yeah, I think maybe Kalani, you and I could
Yeah.
come up with a wordsmith that a little bit because I don't want to also get that wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
sure.
also on that particular project on the St. Julian, I mean, one of the things we're often, we're saying how can they make the criteria work, right? Or how can they get it in line? But on that project, some things came up that for instance, the way the floodplain administrator, which is administered by the city and in relationship with FEMA, the city actually has a lot of control over how they do that. And one of the questions I brought up on that project was like, wait a minute, you're not allowed to put park bench out front. And I want to make sure when there's things that we identify that the city is doing that's sort of ridiculous that we could push back on, that gets put out there and then we hear back. Like I wouldn't know why the flood administrator is interpreting the FEMA rules that draconianly, if that's a word, in such a draconian way. Because it was clearly like we should have park benches that aren't going to wash away in front of that. And so like, I don't know, that was probably the only time I think that for me came up where it's like, wait a minute, here's where we really need the city to defend itself. You know, what they're making the applicant do or not do.
Well,
You know,
that's a
where does
very
that
interesting.
go?
Yeah, that's very. I think what that plays into, Stephen, because again, it's hard to like what is our deliverable, and that's like this third
Right.
talking point here, and to what point, right? And I think that's one thing that's really important. And before we get exactly to that, because again, to that park bench comment, one thing could be to make note of it and have it in some actionable form for
Right.
planning board to follow up on. Like DAB actually
Right.
supports site furniture and believes that, you know, given the flexibility in FEMA with the city jurisdiction involved, should have, you know, access to it and, you know, put that in a way that becomes actionable by the people who can make things conditioned to the permit. My
Right.
question to you guys before we get to the deliverable piece is that I struggle with this personally. Are we being asked to, and do we comment only on the monkey see, monkey do? Meaning staff comes through and says, here's 5 things, and I need you to just put your blinders on and give us feedback with in your professional opinion on does the following item meet this exact criteria. I mean, that's more of a like professional sort of paralegal exercise, right? Versus, and Lauren used to be really in favor of like, well, we're design professionals and like this is what, and somewhat similar to your attitude, Stephen, the other day, like this is why DAB exists. Like I'm
Right,
talking about this
right.
awning, and this thing shouldn't be, we got to save the awning
Yeah,
t-shirts. You know what I mean?
exactly.
But like
Still
I
killing it.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. I don't want to, I don't know how I feel about it. I guess I'm torn. On the one hand, we have this like very keen objective from staff to like make our time efficient because there's a lot of people on board. There's a lot of city staff getting paid, getting asked to stay late at night. There's a lot of applicants that are charging their clients dollars that then become the cost of the project, that become the rents we pass on to people, that become our taxes. So there's all this money and time involved, and let's just be efficient and do what they ask us to do. Just put on our blinders and say, yep, this criteria feels adequate or not. Alternatively, we are design professionals, and this is an opportunity to make our community better. And we get to have a
Right.
dialogue about it, and we volunteer our time to do this, and we want to have an impact on our community. How do you
Well, I
guys
mean,
feel about managing that?
I
Well,
think it's a
I
balance
think
because
there, so
oh,
something that comes up very consistently in all of our meetings is massing and height variance, which is not necessarily in our purview. That's planning board, but our job is to be able to say, yeah, you're allowed to build a fourth story. However, we would like to see that done in a way that has step backs and is not as offensive to, one elevation where you're addressing it better in one elevation, but not carrying it through to the other elevation. So, while they're asking for some variances or they by right can build to 3 stories, 4 stories, whatever it is. I think our job is to be able to say, well, let's break down the massing a little bit to make it fit within the neighborhood or fit within, um, to make it still fits the design criteria, but let's come up with a solution that also um, doesn't, I think the planning board is like trying to get to that objective, but maybe because they don't have architects, they don't have as many solutions or suggestions or ideas that can come out of that.
well, the planning board's hands are much more tied legally than ours. So, I mean, in some ways, they like to get in a lot of those discussions and often probably shouldn't because it's a pretty straightforward process, honestly. But we have that flexibility. And I sort of agree with Lauren. I'm not saying that we do that all the time, but certain things I think it's appropriate for us to say, hey, how can we make this a little better? Like you're getting at, Brendan. Or things like the park benches, right? Like, I mean, there was clearly things that architect wanted to do along, canyon in the floodplain that were being interpreted in a silly way. And I think that's okay for us to point that out.
But what about the awning one? I think that's a really good example because here we have a project that, again, like it's the only reason it came to us is because of a budget criteria. And so
Mhm.
like nothing they like, even if they did put the Skittle rainbow color on all the awnings, like, oh well, like I guess we looked at that as a walkthrough box check, and that was something you felt passionate about that you wanted to chat
Oh,
about, Stephen. And
yeah.
not to say that that's a bad thing. We didn't allocate enough time to it. And so then here we are. And did we like, I guess at no point in that discussion did it seem like it was on the table because we don't have any review. Like, what would we even say to planning board? Like, don't approve the removal of that awning? I'm not even sure we can say that.
Well, honestly, I actually talked with Thor, the original designer from Downey Thorpe and James, and he's like, really? I mean, he was like freaked out, and he was like, wow, we had a bunch of criteria that was written in that we had to do, and that was our solution, and everyone was happy. And he's like, now they're not following the rules that they made us follow. Um, so he was pretty shocked, honestly. I was hoping they all ran with it and fought for it. That
Connie, you
wasn't
have your hand
mine.
up.
But I don't know. I mean, because that was a money thing. The reason they weren't saving them was because of money. There was not a technical issue involved. And
Yeah, I guess my point is there's not like review criteria that weren't being met. So now we're like, and that's the discerning nature of this particular question I'm asking the board
Right.
here is
I would say, especially with the past project, we get a lot of projects in that might have had a PUD that's 10, 20 years old.
right.
And their design criteria are going to be different, and it does change over time. We've had a site review change in the last couple of years that changed the criteria. So applicants do come in and ask why, hey, why do the other projects have a different, why do they look different than, the new ones coming in? So there is going to be some evolution in those criteria. One of the things I think for the board, for DAB to know is there's kind of two paths to kind of policy recommendations and like code changes, disagreements on the design regulations. Is this what's coming up on your with the letter to council? Is if there's kind of these ideological differences, one pathway is to parking lot these ideas that the board comes across during the year. And then at the period of time where you do the letter to council, you can bundle those all together as part of a grouping of code changes. I will say that there's also stipulation as far as what the board has purview over and what it doesn't. And so very specifically, the design advisory board is exempt from weighing in on issues of transportation, utilities, flood, and infrastructure. So those are the kinds of discussions that we would not be following up on with those. That's something that needs to come as a Stephen, if you get involved in another you go to another board and you're talking or you present to city council.
But
But
do you mean technical issues with the flood, not design it? Because that's a design issue, not a technical.
it's all under the flood code. It's not under the design code.
Mm.
So this board specifically is regulated to the downtown design guidelines and design criteria within other design area plans, and specifically the design criteria in the site review. So there's no expansion of the language as
Mhm.
far as that other input. So technically the board should not be weighing in on whether they like a street section, whether they like, utility placement, whether the floodplain, issues, how that's resolved in the site and the grading.
I mean, we
Uh,
can't, you can, like, it's with the same thing with the rain garden requirements, for
Yeah.
example, and the floodplain. Like, you have the necessary evil is that you have to have a massive wall here, but let's try and add some detailing or materiality to make that massive wall, um, function as
Right.
it's supposed to, but also look good and integrate that into the design. And same with the rain gardens. Like, these rain gardens are necessary. Do we have to have it exactly in that location that's blocking access from whatever? Like, I just think we can encourage,
Design.
design.
Yeah. But I would say that there's the policy portion of like these good ideas around design and having a parking lot of these ideas. And that's what the board has not done up until this point, is really collected and started to record some of the ones that they're finding that is really impacting the overall design quality on projects.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, like
me too.
having something like that. And, then and even in the parking lot, that might be where I say, hey, we as a collective design community should push back a little bit on some of the flood issues, even though it's not part of DAB, but we can look at that separately. Somebody could.
And so as part of the meeting, I would suggest then um someone needs to be the identifier of parking lot issues so that the meeting doesn't get off track in a way that you're
Sure.
not able to complete the design review, but still giving yourself some allocated time in there that one of electing someone from the board to be the keeper, the recorder of these. So that at the end of the year, you guys could where you don't have a design review meeting like tonight, you could go through and say, okay, let's go through all of our parking lot and refine those, or
Yeah.
take a look at those in preparation for the letter to council.
I also think that like we shouldn't be sidetracked with any of that before we've actually dealt with the issues. Like if we want to have a discussion on things that are outside scope, it should be like at the end. It's like, right, was there anything else we want to comment on this project? And that's the time to raise it. Because otherwise, yeah, it can completely derail the thing that we actually need to do, or like we've been asked to do.
Well, that St. Julian one's super interesting because one of the criteria they weren't meeting was that their front along Canyon was too, like, they had this big wall and it wasn't.
Articulation.
So it was like, wait a minute, the floodplain people are directly not letting them do their job, And so that was a tricky one. It really is a tricky one there. So I don't know, it was like, I know it's not something, we talk about the flood, but it was still like solvable with elements that the flood administrator could waive. Like it's in their jurisdiction to allow a bolted, park bench in front of the wall, right? So,
Well, and that's the challenge, is like spending time on discussing the merit of the rules themselves, or discussing if we think the rules have been met. And that's where I've always struggled with where to keep comments during these reviews.
because that one could be like a hardship. You'd be like, well, we don't think you're meeting the criteria, but because the flood administrator is not letting you do these elements, they have given you a hardship, and so we think you are meeting it.
Oh yeah, totally.
And we've had other projects like that, like the Millennium
Right.
Hotel. They had some flood restrictions, and they had, elevated above the base flood elevation to what they could. And so that was deemed, the hardship, and that's the best that they could do in that situation.
But
So-
we definitely encouraged, further, and we've done this on several projects, like
Fine-tunes.
further design of landscape.
Yeah.
Right.
Landscaping, just planting and hardscaping and just sort of
Yeah.
to minimize that whatever
Right.
whatever hardship they have, let's make the best of it.
And that's within the landscape design criteria.
Right.
That's in there.
Well,
And the
so
pedestrian, so.
like so like all of this is, this process that Brendan's helping us sort of organize, from presenting what we do to actually figuring out how we're going to do what we do. I think, but and this is what Mark came back from planning board, was just like, you guys are going to have all these discussions, and you're going to, if you can't start, if you don't start imposing some sort of more rigor to your process, your meetings are going to get long, or going to be just as long or get longer. You're not going to get through what you've been asked to get through, et cetera, et cetera. And then all of that could potentially be for naught, because the way in which we deliver this whatever to planning board, which is actually the only way that any of our discussion has implementation effect, gets lost. And that's what his point was, just like, you guys on DAB need to figure out how to give us an actionable summary list so we can condition your commentary into the approval. Otherwise, it's just, hey, if you want to read a nice discussion on a sidebar topic for this presentation, please visit the DAB meeting minutes.
Yeah.
Well, and
So
I think it's also focusing on what's achievable. I mean, that's the way I kind of look at it. It's like these people come in, we're giving them some advice, and I know how many thousands of hours and dollars are happening. And it's like, hey, there was one project, I think I remember I was like, well, what if you just change the brick to a slightly different color? Like, that's not going to cost them any money, and it's easily doable. And
Money's not one of the review criteria, believe it or not.
What's that?
Money's not one of the design
budget.
review criteria.
No, but I mean, just practically, like if, we're giving them ideas that are going to help them, and it is related to the criteria, well, because color can make things look more massive or not, and all kinds of things. But I don't know. I just feel like that.
I don't think we should be hand tying, because a developer could make more money, or it's more feasible to build this project out of cheap, shitty materials, and so we're gonna give them a pass. I think if we think that it should be a masonry building because it's consistent with the neighborhood fabric in that area of town, and that's what makes Boulder a beautiful place to live and build, and why rents are so expensive and everyone wants to move and live here, then we're gonna make you spend some freaking money to do a project in our town to
We
keep it
didn't hold
beautiful.
that, we didn't hold the city to that on the awning. I mean, that's
That
exactly
awning-
why they were changing the design, because they couldn't afford it. There was no
Well,
technical reason.
I think that's an oversimplification because that's like a technology that was invented for that one-time awning. There was no review criteria that said we needed to that they weren't breaking any rules by removing that awning. That's what's different. And so that was a debate on there should be a rule to not remove that, and it's not historic. Not that they were breaking a rule and we allowed them to. That's where this job gets tricky.
Right?
So I would like to nominate Stephen to be the record
lot.
keeper of the parking lot.
All right, I'll be
For
the-
sure. No
And
questions.
we can just, in the meeting,
No
it's just
objection.
going to be our code word and just be like, parking lot
No
issue.
way, that's on the parking lot. Okay.
It's
I'll do
okay.
it.
okay for the parking lot to be rough draft too. It's not like it's going out in the minutes
Right.
Right.
every month. So if it was just, hey, we should parking lot that, describe that into some record, and we can either do like a biannually one where you go over it and clean
Yeah,
it
how
up.
does that work if I have like I can't share a Google Doc, right?
No,
where I'm
you
like-
can't share anything with the whole group because it'll
Okay.
qualify as a meeting. You can share it with me and
Okay,
I can send it to everybody.
okay,
And every time you update it, if you want me to send it out, just send it directly to me and Amelia, and then we'll send it to everyone.
okay. And then people can send them to me.
And then, yeah, and then when we don't have a design review, we can slot time for, hey, let's go over the record. Let's go over our parking lot and refine those and clean up, let's make it the rough draft, a final draft or something.
And that'll help our city council meeting. I think, so we only have
That will help.
14 minutes left of Rory's time. So I know you've been passionate and vocal about item 3, the deliverables. So I'd like to maybe jump while we have the rest of your time to jump to that. Because I am curious what are our collective thoughts on how to make our recommendations more actionable. Maybe, I mean, I don't know how much flexibility we have in this, Kalani, but maybe the meeting minutes, maybe there needs to be an additional document or something. I don't know. Like
No.
somehow, if the meeting minutes aren't conveying to the planning board what our recommendations are.
Can I ask a
Um,
question then, Rory, on your feedback? Did Mark say that they were looking for like kind of a outline of what a condition could be? Is that what he was hoping for? That it was that direct?
I'm not sure that our conversation was descriptive enough to get to that level of refinement. I think it's just, and he's not the first, like even when I forget who it was from Caddis that used to be on planning board.
Brian?
Brian.
Yeah, same thing. He was like, guys, I'm here. I'm an architect. You have an architect on planning board. Like, let's organize your feedback and I will figure out how to work it into a condition.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I would say, you have latitude, Brendan, then. Like your latitude could be as light as having more specificity to things. Like, for example, you don't recommend siding, but you do recommend a masonry. Like you could say that in that recommendation summary. Or you could go so far as to say, hey, there's you do not think that this building should move forward without a step back in the massing.
Mm.
It can,
Yeah, I think if we use,
that'll help frame up, I think, as planning boards looking at it. Instead, it's nice to have some wiggle room, but if Deb feels strongly about something, put it in the recommendations and the specificity. It's still a recommendation. The board is advisory, so it's not like you're voting and it's illegal.
correct.
finding.
This is where it's tough, right? Like the one on 28th and Colorado, where we're like you need to study that corner, that northwest corner a little bit more. And like so from planning board's perspective, where they're not trained architects, although I think there may be one, but ML, but like they see something different, even if it's not any better, and they're like, well, it's been studied, like check off the dab box. Whereas I'm looking at our recommendation from Caddis, the last month, where we say, relative to them ignoring the existing building that this entire Paseo concept was built around, that is the other half the Paseo, we had a lot of commentary and a lot of people, all three of us chimed in on how that's not appropriate. Like if you're going to save that building and it's going to drive your site plan strategy and it's going to drive this Paseo concept, it can't be this ignored gray scale item in the background. All of that sort of, I guess, opinion and advisement got captured in one bullet point, which I think is great for brevity, by the way, Brendan. Improve design integration and cohesion between the pre-existing building and the new building along the Paseo, as well as near the outdoor gathering space. Could we, if we wanted to make that more of a condition, it could be like DAB does not support further design developments or approval of this building until the existing adjacent building has been brought into, or has design elements that directly tie to it. Something that they can like actionably identify.
I could check. I don't know if there's certain language. Let me check with the city attorney on is it appropriate for DAB to kind of initially craft a condition? I will say this about preliminary drafting of conditions on the fly is that the wordsmithing takes time. So at a board meeting, whether it's planning board or others, that really is something that you could use a lot of your design review or your summary time doing. So
I don't think we want to draft like legit condition language. I guess I think we're getting better with. I think these
yeah,
recommendations are great, to
they're
be honest with you.
definitely more direct and very clear guidance is the most helpful, is clear of a guidance and very if you can summarize it in a way that design professionals or non-design professionals, just your average, person walking down the street can understand, that will be even more helpful.
That's the key, because we're talking to an architect who presented, and then we're using architect lingo, and then our board recommendations sometimes are just pretty broadly using architect lexicon, which
Yeah.
planning board may not fully understand or appreciate.
Well,
So
and I
you
think
Like
gotta
that one,
on the example that you gave about the, the Colorado and 28th Street, we said this needs to be studied, but in our recommendations, it also specifically said some suggestions to encourage the translation of materials from one facade to the other would be
Good. Yeah, totally.
fenestration and awnings and metal projections or
Yeah.
just massing and scaling. I mean, I think that's what I was saying yesterday, that it's really, so two things. It's really critical that we as a board review the meeting minutes, because they are actionable, they are, the
It's the work
pages
product.
that are
It's the work
going
product of the whole meeting.
right. And then, but secondly, a really good point that Kalani and Amelia brought up yesterday was that like the meeting minutes really have to be only what's written down is the language and the words that we said in the meeting, that we can't like post justify or add on to our comment
Re-review.
design review in the meeting minutes. So we have to be really careful about like, oh, well, I came up with a great idea after the meeting, but I can't put that in the meeting minutes because it's not actionable because we didn't talk about it in the meeting.
Yeah.
right.
But the specificity is really helpful, and the examples. So I would say don't shy away from examples if you feel like it's justified, because that will help planning board craft some of those conditions. And I will check with the attorney's office on what's the kind of line in the language that you can use as far as your recommendations. How far can you go where you say this is a do-over, or designed a whole facade?
Mhm.
Right. Or what,
Yeah.
I was going to say that the Paseo example, I mean, you know, like what you guys wrote, I think is good. It gives a good direction. If you take it to the next step, like you should do a condition that you actually have to update the old building. I'm not sure that that's legally tenable. Like we might think that that's what they should do, but is the developer required to put new siding and repaint the old building to make it match the new? I don't know, right?
I don't know
Maybe
either.
the
Well, the
board
board
could put
is
that.
advisory, and so you could say it, and then
That would
as
be a
that
good
gets
idea.
weighed when it's at
Right.
planning board, as far as how it weighs against meeting the condition, all of the site review criteria.
And I wonder if maybe we can include in the project summary, once we've gone through all of these, and we can say in the project summary that, DAB highly recommends that these 3 items are changed, or that it has to be massing on the south elevation, the scale of the windows, and whatever, the
Mhm.
furniture layout, whatever.
Yeah, maybe
Uh,
a few more stronger words like improved design integration. Maybe there's a way to make that sound a little stronger. What I was most interested in getting to the deliverable portion, and I apologize that I have to jump, but was because I think it reverse informs all of the like how to run the meeting. If we understand that what at the end, what is the objective? How are we going to package up our feedback? I do think it helps us understand what sort of feedback should we give back to the awning question, back to the are we commenting on the rules themselves or on whether or not the applicant meets the rules? Like all of that sort of plays into then, well, and what's this tidy package and what do we do with it at the end of a meeting?
Right.
So the way that it's set up right now is just, here's one section of work based on the last agenda was, here's some of the criteria that was bundled together. Then there's a recommendation summary, but then there's another 10 minutes at the end with some, overarching concluding remarks. So there's several sections of this. So I don't know if that helps, Rory, as far as, but what we didn't talk about is, if you have a project and you maybe you're able to hit all of these fairly efficiently and quickly, that you have time where there's a
That was the
more
goal, is that free talk.
loose design, like a free skate design time to
And
talk
I think Harriet brought that
about.
up where she was like, let's hit everything we've been asked to do. And then if there's more time for parking lot items or just out of bounds discussion, let's at least get through what you've asked us to get through as sort of a respect of the time that
Mhm.
staff has put into it, respect of, the focus that the applicant has, their attention's been focused on, that would sort of be our baseline due diligence to address what we've been asked to address
Mhm.
before going haywire.
Yeah,
Right.
and if we've got something we really want to talk about it, well then the owner, like it's ownership on us to be concise in our feedback, not repeat what other people have said, so that we can get to the thing if we think that's more important.
mhm. I mean, nowhere in the design packet did it say for the Caddis project that there needed to be a better integration of the existing building. So
True.
it's oftentimes these issues do come up in our discussions, and it is our way of addressing and also coming up with potential solutions for the issues that have been identified. So I think we've been able to kind of work some things in that still fall within the boundaries of the discussion items.
I would say, Brendan, I think you're doing a great job. I just want to make sure that that's noted here. We're sort of nitpicking. We're putting awareness to how we're delivering these meetings, which is really good. And I honestly, when I was reading through this recommendation, I was kind of like, this is pretty good. This is great. It's brief. It's open-ended enough that we're not designing the building for them, but we're being clear on sort of direction of where it needs attention. And hopefully planning board could take, I think we are making all of the growth mechanism. We're implementing growth in the board.
Yeah.
And there's been some new members that have joined, between even just Stephen and Harriet. And it's good to have these touch base meetings. You just sort of everyone can get on the same page of what the objectives of this board are, particularly under the new leadership.
And I think I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm encouraging all of us to, like, we are well prepared, we have this packet, we understand what planning staff, where they're coming from. Let's approach these questions as designers and, design professionals, and we're going to come at this at a different angle. And I think I just am encouraging us um, to be thoughtful, but also kind of creative and come from a different angle in our responses. And I'm psyched about how things have been turning out. And one example of that is like, whoa, we need to move the trash, whatever, I think we just are coming at this from a really cool perspective and a different angle that needs to be celebrated in our discussion and in our summaries and comments. So I think it's evolving. I think it's been good.
Thanks, Rory.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you
Rory.
guys. Thank you, Brenda.
Thanks.
Kalani,
I-
can I ask a question? What
Yeah.
happens? So after they go to the meeting,
Yeah.
you send them like the applicant, the information, like then they go to planning board. Like, would they have made tweaks at that point or not?
So, you like on a site review project, not like on the awning one, that was kind of
Right.
that was an administrative approval. So
Sure.
on an entitlements like this one, they came in. Before they came to DAB, we made sure that any of the kind of site geotech issues that might change the building design are resolved to, pretty high, they're not going to have to break the building up or do anything on flood or transfer. So once they get that nailed down in the building design, then it comes to DAB. And from there, you guys do your review. We get the recommendations out of the minutes, those summaries. The applicant gets those. And it depends on what the applicant gives us in response to those. Sometimes it's very detailed, like the applicant on the 28th Street project took every single one of your bullets in this next submittal and addressed or didn't, address the ones that they're wanting to incorporate. And so what'll happen is and this I think is their last submittal before they go to planning board.
Okay. So
So
they
that
submitted to
gets
you.
wrapped up, that packet portion will be wrapped up into the planning board packet that goes to them with the DAB criteria, how they're responding to it. And so they can see visually and through a summary on how they, responded or not responded to
So
whatever
if they didn't respond, it's still used in your staff report. Say, well, they didn't respond, or how does that work?
the staff report, if it's it if it's once very glaring that they didn't respond, they usually have a justification to it
Sure.
or not, and it's really up to the board. Well, staff will look at it, see if they still meet the criteria. If they meet the criteria still, but they're not meeting DAB's recommendation, that is put into the staff report. But it's not highlighted because the board is advisory. So it's really incumbent on planning board at that point, or your planning board liaison that was part of the review while they're in here. Usually you have a planning board liaison during these, that they'll flag some of that too as the project is brought up.
So the planning board, it's not like incumbent upon them to seek out our meeting minutes and recommendations. You give that to them because when I was talking to those several planning board meetings, they were like, "What's DAB?" You know?
Great.
So
And I'm not sure why, because I feel like they are the ones that have been referring the
Right.
projects over.
That's great.
And so like in this, you can see here, this was a city council referral, but after it's gone to during the concept plan, So you have received both planning board and council referrals. So I'm not sure, was it a new maybe it was a new member?
I don't know. But yeah,
Okay.
But I guess that just sort of lends credence to us being pretty straightforward with what we're recommending. So it's not convoluted and they can understand it.
I would say if you want the
Action.
board, if you want the applicant to have flexibility in how they solve the problem, you can write your recommendation looser. If you feel like it's not critical, it can be loose. But if
Right.
you feel like it's something that, for example, on that last project, the recommendation was to attend to both the north and south facades for the massing.
Mhm.
Like that was very specific, the one that example. So you can go both ways. If you feel like it's a critical one, you can be more specific on whether you want that massing should have some step back at the fourth floor or
Yeah, and a couple of times we've had the comment of material changes need to happen on inside corners, and I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on that. I just like they need to remember that rule and keep that in
that's
mind. Like,
and staff checks for that. So the planning board or the staff planner will go through and they'll check for, screening on the equipment, the roof equipment, that the materials wrap back to, whatever plane, or there's transitions, in the in-plane transitions have the appropriate detailing element that needs to be there. So
Right.
they go through and do that. You don't have to itemize all of these. But I
mhm,
would say, so one example of maybe as you're trying to gain some efficiencies in your review and prioritizing the most important criteria versus ones, you'll recall Shannon had not put every criteria in the memo that was
yeah,
partially satisfied because some of them were things like, hey, did it wrap back? All the materials wrap back? What is there rooftop screening? And some of it was partially satisfied, but she didn't want you to spend time on, the 12 partially satisfied when there was 4 big not satisfied criteria
right.
that really needed a lot of attention. So I'd say that, we can try that again if you want to try that again, where you're welcome to add things that are important in, but if you want staff to provide in the memo, really the big moves that are the most important in there, they can do that and summarize those. And then you can pick and add the partially satisfied if you'd like.
Yeah, so so that specific example, just so Stephen and Harriet, you understand, like when we got the DAB packet, it had 6 criteria that were partially met. And then in our meeting minutes, there was only like 2 criteria that were up for a suggestion or 1 criteria. And so in that pre-planning meeting, I was like, no, I think it's important that that we should, again, because we're coming at it from a different perspective, I think that we should be able to lead the conversation. And so it would be nice if you guys didn't sort of select what items should be discussed, and then but we can prioritize or eliminate
Okay.
um, in our
Yeah.
pre-planning meeting, because there was some important that obviously the mechanical screening was
Yeah.
not something we even discussed, but we can
Yeah.
eliminate that. But there are
And
other
these are like
things.
rote checklist ones. Maybe there's rote as we start to do this with the new checklist. Is maybe there's ones
Really?
that don't need to be on the list anymore. Maybe the rooftop screening is not one that needs to be part of the review because it is part of the code section as far as
Mhm.
screening.
Parking lot, Stephen, that's a parking lot issue.
There it is, parking lot. I haven't started my parking lot yet. We're still grading.
So yeah, we can still bring them to the meeting and then Brendan, you and Roy or whoever is the chair and the vice chair can then prioritize and say, hey, we don't need to talk about that one or talk about this one.
Yeah, and then Stephen can be like, why isn't this on here?
Well, what about like I'm just thinking back to some of the things that came up on like the St. Julian one. I remember we had a really great discussion
Yeah.
and the architect was open to it. That like the path, from Pearl all the way down to Canyon was really important. And they had like the garbage there and they'd sort of,
Mhm.
and I just wonder like what happened with that? And was that idea and comment did we stress it enough so that planning board like looked at that or not, or another example, I remember the one a couple months ago on, the one over by off of Colorado by CU, like I remember we looked at the north facade. It was like kind of funny because it was like 2 stories of brick or something, but then and it was like, oh, just make this a little higher, like simple things that the designer's like, oh yeah, you're right. And I don't know, like how if that stuff ever ends up
So,
happening or
one of the biggest examples that I think maybe one of the biggest dab mishaps was for the Harvest House, that
Mhm.
our meeting minutes were not very specific, and I don't think they captured the heart of our discussion and conversation in such a way that there were not good actionable items. And then when I was asked to attend the planning board meeting, um, I really had to go back and listen to the conversation because and sort of familiarize myself with what we talked about, because I think, we had big discussions about this being the gateway to Boulder and the entry, and this elevation really needs to be changed, and the massing of it, and the landscape, and that it's too tall, and it's too straight, and it's too flat. And then when I read the meeting minutes, it was like none of that was in there. And so I think that was hard for planning board because they agreed that that was not a good elevation, but um, they didn't have our support or our meeting minutes to kind of back that up.
right.
So I think that, yeah, I think, it is important, I think, to have these conversations, but also to document them and prioritize them.
Either way.
I would
Well,
say
and I
too,
wonder oh,
sorry,
um,
on the minutes,
yeah,
especially on the summary, because that's what gets into the action minutes. And while the record is the official record is the video, relying on whether the board members are going to be able to go back and watch the more detailed discussion. So if you feel like there's a very salient idea that needs to get into those recommendations,
right.
definitely put it in there in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Good.
And
Yeah,
it sounds like you're
in
giving yourself
summary.
enough time during that period of those recommendations that you'll have some time to get some feedback and kind of wordsmith things too.
Yeah.
Kalani, and I know I brought this up, and I'm sure I'm not the first one about getting our hands on this stuff early. Like, a project like the student housing one on 28th. Okay,
Yeah.
it's fairly straightforward, like what's going to happen there. But the Harvest House, oh my God, like that one,
Came in
I
like that.
I wasn't at that. I could imagine that, Brandon, when you guys got it, you're like, what the hell? Like, oh, I mean, right? Like if you could have seen it way before they had that solution,
Yeah.
Right.
that one's so important and it's such a big move and it's,
Yeah.
tying together so many different factors. It's not just, infill.
Right.
I would
And
say
how
that
do we
this
get our
is,
hands on earlier on that kind of stuff?
so I would say that's a policy parking lot, kind
Yeah,
of like matching DAB submittals to the kind of design delivery, right? That you would see in private, practice, that how
right.
things evolve. But sometimes we get projects that are very well developed, way more than for a concept plan that,
Right.
it has floor plans.
Right.
And so there's not, and concept plan, not every project gets a concept plan. And so sometimes you get a concept plan that the applicant, like that particular developer, was fairly well developed when it came in originally.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a lot of moves. They were doing quite a bit of flood and um, revisions to the floodplain. And so they were trying to get ahead of that schedule. But sometimes we do occasionally get ones that are maybe not as well developed. So it's just we don't always, Deb does not always get a chance to see concept plan because it's not always a referral that you will receive.
So the
Um,
planning board would have to refer, how would we see it? It would be a
So
planning.
it would come from planning board. If it's not in the design guidelines where it comes to you automatically,
Right.
Right.
during a concept plan, that is referred after the concept plan submittal, it's referred to the design advisory board at that point. And so that usually at that point, they're in their site review submittal.
Yeah,
Right.
so unless it's kind of downtown or and above the price point, we're
Yeah.
not going to really see it early on because it doesn't have to come to DAB. And
Yeah.
oftentimes, the way that I look at it too is like there are some architects that were just, they have this, fully
Yeah.
baked idea and they're pretty
And the
rigid on
program,
what they
right?
wanted in the program and what they want to change in the design. And I think planning board, once if they're coming up against some real roadblocks and seeing like this architect will not change the massing or they're being really um, resistant to incorporating any of our comments. I feel like that's sometimes when they're like, okay, Dad, let's
Yeah.
we need some backup here. And so I think that
Did the Harvest House, what, because that's not downtown? Is
No,
it,
it's not, that was a referral. I mean,
that was a referral.
what was
all
that
of
a
these
referral in
student housing
concept?
have been referrals.
It wasn't a referral in concept, it was already.
So I would say the only projects you've seen that were mandatory review were the St. Julian
Mm-hmm.
project and then the awnings. That was an automatic review within the non-historic interface areas. So you saw those two projects and those came in at that level.
Right.
And what
Um,
about there's the couple on the Navy building on Pearl Street and then the DTJ, those were in
Yeah, those were within the design guidelines too.
yeah.
So those came in at that level. And not every project requires a concept plan too. So sometimes there's not even an early warning for projects within the downtown area if it's not meeting a certain threshold for concept plan. Applicants don't typically elect to have another review kind of track.
Right.
So they don't always if they don't have to do a concept plan, they don't, they usually don't.
So the Harvest House, we saw that not in concept.
And site review at the beginning of the site review, once they resolved kind of landscape flood and
Right.
you know,
That's when you guys saw
civil
it.
issues. Yeah.
Okay.
And we like to send, you know, it's we it's there's a kind of because DAB per the regulations is only allowed to see something one time, right? And
Mm,
there's been special cases where they've had a re-referral condition that it's kind of come back around, but it's very,
okay.
very limited in those cases. So in the code, it's you go to the design for applicant's sake, your design advisory visit is a one-time deal.
Sure.
And so we want to make sure that what they're getting as far as a design review is going to be somewhat of the same project that they will see at planning board. So if they come too early and they haven't resolved the engineering and they haven't resolved the flood and the transportation, and you see one building and the form and the massing and is one
Right.
of one type, and then they start to resolve those issues, and all of a sudden you have three buildings instead of one building, and one building has got a
Right.
big plinth because of the flood. That's hard to rectify of what planning board gets to see versus what you saw. So we're
Sure.
trying to make sure that there's some level of consistency between what the board DAB sees and what goes to planning board as far as a similar project that they can see evolution in the design. So, but
Right.
we've wrestled with this back and forth over the years, Stephen, as far as what's a good time,
Yeah,
to
that
write.
makes sense. I mean, I brought up that Milwaukee thing before. Like, I think that could be a cool model, like where you have a voluntary, so that we
Well,
would see it twice, but they would, way
yeah.
early on, if they wanted advice. And, you have to prove yourselves as a
I
kind
wonder
of
too, though, because like other boards have what I would call enrichment activities. You
Mhm.
know, like the landscape or the landmarks board has their historic tours, and they do month of modern, where I don't know if DAB, because this would be a led project where the board, you know, works with the local chapter of the AIA on something. You know, you
Mhm.
look at where you can partner. Maybe you have an AIA charrette, a pre-charrette thing before a project's ever submitted, similar to what
Right.
ULI does on some projects. So,
Mhm.
you know, there's a role for non municipal services to look at projects like as a maybe a precursor in the good design review and getting a, you know, some of those other design issues you're looking to tackle.
But couldn't we be a resource in like a pre-app meeting? You know, I mean,
On the, you know, and I'm not sure, the pre-app meetings are typically just questions.
no, I
And
know, but
so right now the board is relegated to the design, the meeting time and that one visit to that meeting. So they don't have a secondary design kind of input path.
well, it's interesting because both Aaron and Lauren have, you know, expressed to me um some, you know, like, oh, you know, how can we get Dad more involved and stuff? So,
Yeah.
you know, it's not like they're not thinking about, especially Lauren, right? I mean, she was
Yeah.
with Dab and she's on city council. So, you know, it's something we could think about in our letter, like,
Definitely.
you know, like how can we be more useful and, you know, how and like how can we, you know, help elevate design in the city?
Yeah.
You
I
know,
Which
think
is
that that's a
what
great
we
one
wrote.
for those design policy ones. You know, for a while
yeah,
we had the Design Excellence Initiative that had several kind of design enrichment activities associated with it as part of the work plan. It's no longer on the work plan, but
right.
Yeah, and I think we've written that same letter to city council every year that I've been on the board. So
Yeah.
we want to be more involved. How can we
Yeah.
encourage good design?
Right.
Yeah.
No, but it, you know, maybe it's a matter of just getting the right ears
Yeah,
listening to it, but and maybe it's you know, I always think too, giving examples, you know, like Klein's gonna laugh. The one that always just kills me recently is the one on, you know, the old People's Clinic site, right? Like
That's
that
a
one,
by right project.
it was a by right, but
Yeah,
if there
by
was
right.
if there was a simple process that they could have put the alley behind that building, which meant the setback needed to move,
Yeah.
everyone they would have done it, but there wasn't a simple process.
They had opportunity to do a site review and they elected not to.
Well, who would elect to do site
Yeah.
review?
So,
Not
so
happen.
that's where that, I mean,
I mean,
that's,
you have to be nuts. No,
yeah.
I know. I'm just saying, like, it's almost like,
I'm still shocked that we allow 7-foot fences in front yard setbacks. So,
oh yeah. I mean, Broadway is crazy. Like, there shouldn't be any fences on Broadway or Iris.
so,
I'm gonna-
but yeah, I mean, these are like those overarching design policy discussions
yeah, we could.
for the parking lot too, because they help shape some of that. So
Sure.
yeah, I have 4 parking lot issues, Stephen.
All right,
I'll
send them.
email those to you.
the only thing I ask is if you're emailing parking lot issues, make sure you're emailing one person to one person. So
Right.
Yeah.
then like just you to Brendan, not
Yeah.
wrapping in a meeting.
Right. Well, I can include you, Kalani,
You can
right?
include me, yes.
Right. And 1 board member.
Yeah.
Right. That's perfect.
And don't forward a chain of other discussion points. So it'll mean you'll have to do a bit of like copy and pasting, Stephen. So
Yeah, that's fine.
okay.
Yeah. Well, and another parking lot thing would be how, like, maybe it sounds like if it's a policy thing, like whenever that discussion is happening, you know, amongst the city staff or you guys have, you know, like how could Dab be involved in that, you know, as a getting designers sort of
I will
included?
tell you that we are driven by council's work plan. So if council
Right.
has a work plan of revising, say, site review criteria, There's usually an engagement
Right.
schedule that goes out, and it's like the Chamber of Commerce, it might be design professionals, got other folks. But sometimes, some years, there's not a lot of design work, so, or that it wasn't picked up as part of the work plan.
Sure.
Oh, you know, maybe this year they'll have some of that, they'll integrate and fold into something that they're working on, or they get recommendations from another department on what they're working on.
Right.
So I will send you guys kind of the background on that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. Was there
Well,
more in here that you wanted me to take notes of? Or
no, I mean, I think that too, the prioritization, I think it's just something that we would like to, that we
okay.
kind of have adopted and implement, we want to implement that and, but kind of get the blessing of
Okay.
the rest of the board that this is what we're doing and is that okay?
Brandon, can you just like give us like how would this just a pretend like example? All right, project X comes in. Here's what happened. Like just walk us through like the meeting as you see it right now.
You want me
Oh.
to make this larger, the white page?
Yeah,
Brandon, would that
maybe,
help?
but
Yeah.
I mean, I know this, but I think you can like summarize it. Like, so it would be, because we were kind of saying maybe it's 5 minutes of, I mean, it's just to summarize our meeting tonight. Like they present for 5 minutes and then we have 5 minutes of questions. Like what, then we each get a minute or something to respond. We do a roll call.
Let me go and grab this.
Yeah, so we have, I mean, we were trying to pack a lot in that the first 5 minutes and like the meeting often takes 5 minutes even to get going,
Sure, yeah.
you know?
I was going to ask about that because there's a quicker way for us to really get the meeting going. And one of them is, Brendan, you call the meeting to order, and then Amelia, as the board secretary, reads every board member, and you say here. That starts the attendance, kicks it off very quickly, and then you move. So you're not waiting for folks to come in. And you can
Right,
move straight away.
yeah, and waiting for people to like hit unmute and introduce
Yeah.
themselves. That might be great.
Okay, let me,
And so I'll call the meeting. Well, you can hit record and then I'll call the meeting to order and then
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
roll call would be nice. Like in just
I'll do, so it'll be chairperson, intro, open the meeting,
yeah.
and then we'll do a roll call. And that usually is just the board members. So she will just call out the board members and the planning board liaison, and that is it, not the applicants. The applicants can introduce themselves when they come up.
Yeah, and same with staff that's working on
Yeah.
the project. Yeah.
Yeah, we should be doing that. Okay, so then we'll have a roll call attendance. Um,
And then we can jump right into the approval of the minutes
yep.
and then public participation.
Let me do something here. Let's see.
And you were going to check if we can cut that down to 2 minutes instead of 3.
The
Public participation.
Well,
But-
it's you do it on a case by case basis. If you
Okay.
feel like there's so many applicants that you want, or so many members of the community that are asking to provide input, you can say, since we have, X number of people waiting, we'd like to make the time 2 minutes instead of 3 minutes. You need a motion and a second, and you have to vote on it though.
Okay.
And for this one, the general comments, I don't know if we've ever had anybody participate.
Okay, yeah. I've once or twice, it's very rare.
But it's usually they're participating and specifically talking about the project we're reviewing.
Yeah. Or we've had a couple where folks show up and they were meant to be in another meeting. They didn't realize they were at transportation and they wanted to come talk about that, and it wasn't, it happened. There's so
Yeah.
much going on in the city, so
Sure. We
Yeah.
haven't seen Lynn Siegel in a while, so
Right.
sorry.
True.
So public partition, roll call attendance. And then you have your public participation. 3 minutes each.
Can
Then,
we set like a, I don't know, it seems to me if there's 5 or more people, waiting to talk, that, I don't know, is there some kind of standard that, because that's like 15
let me
minutes.
ask and see what the standard is. I don't think
Yeah.
that there's like a threshold. I think it's just on a case by case basis.
Yeah.
And
for
this
me, it
isn't the
seems like
big
if
one.
we had 15,
Yeah.
if we had 5 people, that'd be 15 minutes. That's when we should start to be like, okay, let's do 2 minutes. But
So the next one is the procedural introduction. This is what Dab does, just letting folks know what the board it has purview over. And the items in front of you tonight or any night is, letting folks know that it's advisory and that you're not, approving or denying a project. That might help set the tone. And you could, and that's right before but we also need, I forgot something here, the approval of the minutes. Roll call attendance.
And then so the role of the applicant, when do we want input from them, or do we?
So when you do this portion, when you have the actual discussion item, I'm just gonna put this here. And I just want to acknowledge it's 6 o'clock for anybody
Yeah.
that has to leave. Discussion items. You do have right here, you could introduce what your expectations are, or we could jump straight into what the staff introduction, which is 3 minutes.
I think the staff, because I'm hoping you guys tell the applicant the expectation ahead of time.
Of the structure of the meeting.
Yeah, or just what we want them to present on, like,
Yeah, we will tell them ahead of time. If there's any other guidance that you want to give them, before the, applicant gives their introduction.
Yeah, can we move,
Yeah, move
Yeah,
this
maybe-
one.
move that one up to under procedures and format? So what does DAB do? What is our expectation of the applicant?
oh, right, yeah.
Oh. This is me doing what? Staff intro. Okay, follow that in right here. All right.
Because yeah, Stephen, we were talking about like the meeting that we had for the 28th in Colorado student housing project. It was like
Mhm.
the Danica, who's like planning consultant, and
Right.
like the owner and the architect, and there was like way too many people that participating in this conversation. We just
Yeah.
don't need that much input from
Right.
them. It just felt a little out of control.
Yeah.
I just want to do something right here.
And then the question and answer with the applicant, I mean, I really think we should, internally, like, we should put our hand up, and
Yeah,
so that Rory and I don't just jump in, start blabbing. We
So-
put our hand up, and then, Brendan, you call on us, and we have to keep our question brief, it's not a statement from us, it's a question. It's not like, whoa.
And I think sometimes questions arise in the discussion.
Yeah, exactly. That's the
That's-
only thing I'm curious about, how we deal with it.
that I would consider this 5 minutes the same way other boards consider it clarifying questions.
Okay.
It's a lot of it is to help inform when you have, because you're going to have a little break in here that is public comment. And so
Yeah.
if you feel like there's certain questions that whoever's there for public comment needs to hear to influence their comment, you should also, this is a good chance for it. You can always ask more questions later. So, but these are
Okay.
the burning kind of questions. Public comment there.
And then we
Makes
go
sense.
through each criteria. Is that where this happens?
Well, I think you need to establish the order of the board member input. So that kind of role, like how, because everybody speaks once before they speak again, or if you're going to have someone establish that order, but then I don't know if you guys landed on if you're doing it criteria section by criteria or.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just introduce, say we have 6 criteria items that we're covering today. Some of them will be grouped but we'll be responding to each item in this order. And
yeah, that sounds good.
and then we decided it worked well last time that the vice chair and the chair go last. And then my review kind of turns into the summary, which helps me organize the thoughts a little bit better too.
That sounds good. And then how much time do we get on or each person get? Is that you guys are going to decide
And-
that?
Yeah.
It's gonna depend on how many criteria that are broken out. So,
But it's anywhere from like 1 to 2 minutes, I'm assuming, or something.
Right. So if 5
Yeah.
members arrive and we have
so on this one,
allocated 5 minutes, then it would be 1 minute per person.
Okay.
so like on this one, there was 20 minutes allocated for 2, and you have 5 minutes or 5 people, so you have about 4 minutes each.
So I think in terms of questions of the applicant, like if I had 4 minutes,
mhm.
and I want to ask a question, that eats up my time.
Yes.
That's one way to do it. Like, Kalani, tell me why you're picking that brick or whatever, real quick, because I
Yeah.
only got 4 minutes. But I still got 4 minutes. And then
Well,
who's
also it's
policing
also kind of
that?
loose because I might say I think it meets the design criteria and I have nothing to say.
Yeah, that's fine too.
Yeah.
Then do you cede your 3 minutes to somebody else, or no, it just goes away?
I mean, I think what we've decided is that that I have limited brain power during the meeting. And so I cannot keep track of the time. And also I'm having a hard time seeing when people have their hands raised or when people are chatting. So I think we just are kind of rely on each other to
See, I think that's bad.
rein it in.
We have Amelia do that. I think we need someone to be the police officer and be like, Brandon, you've got 1 minute left. Like, I think that'd be helpful to keep us on track.
It's difficult because we don't want to interrupt your train of thought
Mhm.
on those
Oh,
things.
yeah, I get it.
So we can look to try to put a timer up. If we can find one. Right now, we only have a 3-minute timer, but I don't know if it's something if we can look to find an adjustable
Yeah.
timer.
I
But
have
not
a 2,
every-
a 3, and a 5. So
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
And not every board likes to see a timer, so we just didn't want to pop a timer up there and
Mhm.
all of a sudden you feel like you're under a lot of pressure to finish. So one of the timers is, I think Landmarks uses a backwards timer,
Countdown.
or they use a one where you're not doing the countdown, and you're doing so it doesn't
Oh.
as what negative influence as far as, but we can put one up if that is okay with, if you're seeing that on the screen, that might be helpful.
I think
mean-
also maybe Kalani, if you make if we have like a chat that goes to the panelists.
I wish I could. I wish I could just chat, make a group of the board members, but once we allow an applicant to present, they are a panelist.
Mhm.
And so if I say, all panelists, any of the chat goes to everybody.
Right.
And so, I'm happy to, if you want to delegate a person that's a timekeeper on the board for that meeting, I can chat them. instead of chatting you, Brendan, because I know it's hard to juggle all that. Like before I was chatting Rory to remind you
Yeah,
of the time. That's an option we could also do.
I mean, maybe it'll be fine. Maybe it's a non-issue. I don't know.
yeah.
I have
need to
no
jump.
problem somebody saying, Steven, shut up. It's like you've got 30 seconds left. But some people do. Some people are like really offended by that. I'm not like just
Harriet, you need to jump. Is that
Yeah,
what
I
you
need to
said?
jump. Sorry.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Harriet.
Thank you.
Yeah,
We'll see you in
bye.
December.
Sounds good.
Or-
Bye.
Have a good
Bye.
trip.
Thanks.
So, and maybe the way to handle that is, just before you start the discussion, let us know if you want the timer or, but you can let me know during our agenda meeting too. We could do it
Okay.
that way.
So we've lost our quorum,
Yeah.
but
We didn't need a quorum for a matters item, but I've got this in here is the roll call of the DAB members, intro to the number, and then what would just be is the review, would be going over the review criteria,
mhm,
um, review criteria, and then you have the criteria review, breakdown kind of, and then you have the summary recommendation.
mhm.
And then you have the at the end, what did you call the one last time was
Like, just
concluding remarks.
concluding remarks. Yeah.
And then you have concluding remarks. And this
And I
is
like that.
and that's done by who? That's like whoever wants to.
We went person by person.
So that's a
Like,
roll call again.
mhm.
Okay.
And
and
then,
then we just need the thing on I don't know if you need to formally recognize your parking lot or not, or it's just the board knows and just say, hey, that's a parking lot item.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's fine.
You can do that during matters. You could do the parking lot just as a note. We don't want to review everything, but you might want to say, hey, I've got 3 parking lot items that I'm adding to our list.
Can the people put parking lot items in the chat?
They can't, like, you guys can chat each other. Just know that all of the chat is Quora-able. So whatever chat you're chatting through there that you can pull in, that's a record, that's a official meeting record. But also someone's going to need to pull those out of the chat. So from your group. So Stephen, if they want to just send you one through the
Yeah,
chat,
I can what's easiest.
that works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can let folks know, to send them to you in the chat at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, I'll think about what's
Okay.
the easiest way.
Um,
I'm bad at typing while I'm thinking.
yeah. No, it's a thing. It's real. It's a lot of multitasking happening.
Right.
So I think that's what we have here is concluding remarks here, summary recommendation. I'll send this out just as a note for the meeting tonight, just to have, because it's just this first section is the structure. And
Yeah,
And
maybe the
then-
concluding remarks could be, each DAB member's like priority issue or what,
Yeah.
if there's one issue, like, I really think this south elevation needs to be studied or whatever, but, and then that would help sort of, really drill in the actionable items that we would like to see.
Yeah.
I would say too, for the concluding remarks, is one of the ways to control this portion of time is just when you get here is to mark that time. Like you could let folks know both at the beginning saying, hey, we've got these here. If we want to make an open design discussion, format at the end to carve out some time. We've only been allocating really 10 minutes. So if folks need, if this needs to be more. But when you get to this portion, just going over the time stamp and go, okay, how much time do we actually have if we have another project coming up? Because
Right.
we send the time schedule to the applicant. So if, okay, we think that you're going to start at 5:10, type of thing. Give them we give them a ballpark.
Mhm.
So if they show up at 5, thinking they're going to start around that time and they don't start till 5:30 or 6 and we're running over.
Right.
Yeah, that's not fair on them.
So that's one thing I would do is right at the end. And then it's good to have the reminder at the beginning because it's an eyes on the prize. Like if people really want to do that,
Mhm.
to make this discussion period very, concise.
Yeah.
if
Or maybe
everybody's
it's
in.
maybe it's really it's just that, like a quick concluding remark and a designed discussion item that you think is priority. Like
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's burning a hole in someone's pocket, the whole
Right.
whole project, right?
Right.
Well, and if we do our homework, it might be like, I don't really care about those 4 criteria. That 5th one's my thing that I'm going to comment mostly on or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's the benefit of like a kind of that's why you get the packet a week early now
Yeah.
instead of the week of, is to really see if do you have a lot of input or is it something that you feel, it doesn't need a lot of input?
Mhm.
So plenty of prep time for it. I don't know if there was anything else in here. I feel like,
Yeah, and then it was just like board matters, calendar check, and
yeah, oh yeah. Okay, and this one is, wait, hold on. Discussion board matters. So this is the parking lot stuff too. Parking lot note.
Mhm.
And then calendar check and conclude. That's it.
Awesome.
Cool.
I think that looks good.
All right.
This was helpful.
I'm glad that
Yeah.
good use of time since you didn't have a design review.
Yeah.
What I'll
Good
do is
on board.
okay, great. I will send this out as meeting notes for this tonight because there's no minutes. It's just a
Right.
matters item. But this is kind of the notes for the structure, and you'll get it in an email along with a secondary email on the council letter and then the homework portion to prep yourself for the letter, how to have that
Mhm.
discussion.
Mhm.
Then I'll probably talk to you, Brendan, before then because I don't know how many projects we're also juggling November. So
Aha.
you might have a dual discussion of projects and council stuff. So,
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, if the council letter needs to be individual homework and the
bring it to
meat of the
December.
discussion happens in December, then we just need to be disciplined to do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's fine.
And I'm happy to send out, past letters or, as an example of what we talked about, but
Yeah, we can bundle that up with the homework stuff that they have. It's the
yeah,
Pathfinder.
that would be awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I will send this to you.
Maybe we got to figure out a way to send it in a unique way to the council, like Harry Potter owl or something, so they really get it.
Yeah.
It came on a memo this time. It's like an actual official memo kind of format. So
Mm.
we'll attach their memo to your letter. And as part of that whole thing. So
Yeah. I mean, and I suggested at coffee maybe it would be better to write to the planning board or somebody that is a little more related to what we do, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah.
Or we
We'll-
copy the planning board.
parking lot, I'll just parking lot that.
Okay, parking lot that one. I appreciate your guys' time tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Yeah,
letting us
thank
go
you.
over this.
Do we
And-
still officially adjourn? Is that? Or
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think this meeting is a wrap.
I second that.
Okay. Awesome.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Have a good night.
bye?